introduce the topic and the panel that we have today. So topic-wise, we're going to be talking all about territory management for 2024. It's August, middle of August, actually. It's going to be end of Q3 before you know it. Q4 will be here. Territory season is upon us, or at least coming very, very quickly. And so very timely and kind of relevant discussion. But we're going to be talking all about territory design, territory management, things that you can do to be successful in your territory kind of efforts as they come up. And we've got a couple of, I'll say, territory experts, pros, if you will, veterans who have been there, done that, have all the battle scars to prove it as well. And they're going to be dropping some knowledge and some insights on us. And so I'm going to do some really quick introductions of them, but I'm also going to turn it over to them to briefly introduce themselves. So Hayes is going to start with you. Hayes Davis, CEO and co-founder of Gradient Works. Hayes, why don't you give us a quick lowdown on yourself professionally, background, what led you to start Gradient Works, all that good stuff. And then also one interesting kind of personal fact outside of work and your professional life that you can share with the crew here.
Presumes I have anything interesting outside of work in my Hayes Davis, co-founder and CEO here at Gradient Works. And for those of you who don't know, Gradient Works is all about dynamic books and territory design. And so, what we really are building here is a platform to help you select the right accounts, assign the right accounts out to reps, manage that process, and then ultimately hold those reps accountable and optimize the whole thing. So territory design is very near and dear to my heart. And I'll add a little bit to the prompt, Matt. I'm going to share, Jasmine, what radicalized me to focus on territory that much. And Jasmine, if you'll share the same for you, because I think you've got some in your background. But I was previously the SVP of revenue operations for a pretty large publicly traded company. I once went through a 9-month territory design process that ultimately failed and didn't result in anything actually being rolled out. And that was one of the things that that said to me, "Hey, we've got to do something different here." So that's a little bit about my background. I've been a CEO previously. I've been a software engineer. I've been in RevOps. So fell in love with a pretty nerdy problem here, but I think it's something that we all need to address, and you can never start too early. My fun fact is I once had an hour-long conversation at a networking event, oddly enough, with the Middle Hansen brother. So if any of you know Mbop and no other songs whatsoever, that would be it. Anyway, delightful guy, very family-oriented, lots to talk about. So, there you go. There's my fact, but it will not hold a candle to Jasmine's.
Yeah. My follow-up question, though, Hayes, is what did you talk to the Middle Hansen brother about for an hour? Maybe not all the things, but what was the main theme topic?
We talked about running a business, actually.
Oh, yeah?
So, that was the main theme. It was a good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, there you go. From territory management to early 2000s pop, or maybe 90s pop. Hayes has got you. Hayes has got you covered. That's awesome. Thanks, Hayes. And then along with Hayes, we've got Jasmine Carnell, who is the sales ops manager over at Rentable, and has previously been in a variety of different sales ops roles at a bunch of different types of companies. And so, Jasmine, why don't you give us a lowdown on yourself professionally, and then again, just like Hayes, kind of give us one interesting kind of personal fact about yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, current sales operations manager at Rentable, but I have had various roles in both RevOps and sales ops. I got started kind of in this space way back when Six Sigma was a bit more popular. So I have my green belt in Six Sigma, and I think to speak to Hayes, that's a little bit of what radicalized me. RevOps specifically, though, was in about 2018, specifically with territory management. I was an SDR back in the day, and what radicalized me was I was noticing that I was not getting the same amount of inbound leads as another great SDR on the team. And I actually did my own territory analysis to instill my managers to redistribute territories fairly so that I could actually hit my quota numbers. And it was really short after I did a full slide deck and presentation on my analysis that they said, hey, would you be interested in RevOps? So it was actually territory management that radicalized me into the RevOps space as well. My fun fact was that I was actually next door neighbors with Mr. Rogers.
There you go. That is all right. So we got Mr. Rogers, we got the middle Hanson brother, and now territories. I mean, what, like such a logical combination. I don't know what else there is to say about that. That's great. So how long were you neighbors with Mr. Rogers for?
Growing up, actually. So this is kind of putting me in a little bucket of a person, but my parents had a summer house in Nantucket where Mr. Rogers actually retired. So that's where he lived, after he stopped doing a show, and our house was right next to his. So every summer I was there, next door neighbors, Mr. Rogers. If you actually look it up, he was in the Crooked House is the name of his house, because it's actually a house that's crooked.
Nice.
Built on sand dunes.
That is awesome. That's great. And talk about I don't know, what I can only assume would be a like idyllic childhood, as well as like what better way to do that than growing up right next to Mr. Rogers. So
he was awesome. A great neighbor.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome.
If he wasn't, you should never tell anyone that.
Yeah, don't ruin it for us.
Yeah.
Jasmine, please. All right. Well, with that, so Hayes, I'm going to turn things over to you to let us kind of get into the discussion, and then again, just let everybody know as we go through this. Definitely chime in if you have questions, if you have things you're looking for feedback on related to your specific company or examples, or if you just have opinions or thoughts on the topics and the themes of things that we're bringing up. Throw them into the chat, throw them into the Q&A. We will be sure to get to them. And with that, Hayes, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk about this. I think, as Matt said, this is a very timely thing. I think many of us have experienced 2023 that maybe hasn't exceeded our expectations in terms of how the year could go. And I think a lot of us are thinking, okay, how do we do better, whether it's in the second half of this year, or how do we do better in next year? And one of the key ways to think about that has to do with how do we use our reps? How do we cover our market? And that's really about territory. And we'll get into kind of the why. And I think it's really important to talk a little bit about the why, because people just treat territory as it's just a thing, a chore that has to be done. It actually is incredibly important. And it's incredibly important because of what it means for how you can actually use all those incredibly expensive sales resources that you have. We'll talk a little bit about territory design. That's not as cut and dry as you might think. And then get into some of the nitty gritty around how do you actually model out the requirements for your territories, and think about what are the data inputs and things like that you need to build your territory model. And then finally, and I think for those folks in here who are in RevOps, it goes especially that it's especially true that a lot of the success or failure of any of your initiatives isn't really about whether or not you've done all the analysis and you've done all the hard work. It's how are you communicating that to stakeholders? Do you have buy-in? Do you have folks that believe in what you're doing? And I think it's really important to roll that out well. So you can do all this hard work and then ultimately fall flat if the reps rebel, or there's an issue where managers just aren't aligned. So this is the agenda for the day. Jasmine, anything to add to that?
No, I'm so excited to get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, so let's talk about why territories matter. And, Jasmine, you talked about this at the very beginning and how you got into this, right? The fundamental reason here is that we need to create a scenario where our reps can be successful. But what does it mean for a rep to be successful? It means that they have enough opportunity to work, that they can produce at the level that you've planned for. Right. And that's where the alignment is between the rep getting their paycheck and the company getting the hitting its revenue targets. And so let's talk about that a little bit. But I want to talk about that in a little bit of context, because I think this is important. So this is a book from 1919 originally. I think this is a copy from 1924 that we have in here. But territory has literally been a topic of discussion in sales for more than 100 years, and it goes back beyond this. But it's funny too, because even at this point in time, 100 years ago, during like the beginnings of World War I, right, people are talking about like, well, maybe like just breaking stuff up by state doesn't make sense. Maybe there's a different way of doing it. Like there's these types of things that have been debates now for a century, right? And the debate's not settled. So a lot of what we're going to talk about is, how do you actually get from here to there? And so, yeah. And we had a question about whether the presentation will be shared, and yes, we will definitely share it afterwards. So Jasmine, here's my definition of territory design. And it's a little bit nerdy. It's a little bit like my computer science background, because it includes the word parallelize, right? But the way I think about it is like, you got to devise a way so that if you hire more reps, you can make more money, right? And that sounds pretty simple, but the reality is you got to figure out how you're going to feed those reps. What are they going to work on, and how are they not going to step on each other's toes? And so territory design is all about that. It touches on rules of engagement, those types of things. This is all super important, but this is how I think about it. That's my nerdy definition. Jasmine, do you have a less nerdy or more nerdy, I don't know, definition?
I think the best way to sum this up is actually something I heard on a webinar a few years ago is, and I never forget this line, and it's kind of my mantra on a daily basis. And when I think about my role as a supporter for sales reps, right? Like I explain to people like my grandmother, I'm the janitor of the sales team. That's what I do. I do all the data. I clean it up. I make sure everything's functioning. I imagine myself a little wrench and bucket, just going around, fixing everything and making things smooth for them. And so the line that stands out to me is sales reps are not data scientists. Mm-hmm. We expect them to be able to find the right account, know that they're in the right buying cycle, and be able to do that across multiple different tech stacks that we have for them. If you got ZoomInfo, know how to build a list out in ZoomInfo and find the next best account to go prospect, right? A solid territory design is where we're actually bringing the data straight to them, so they don't have to think about the next best account to work. It's already assigned to them, and it's the right account and the right buying cycle. So for me, it's just about territory design is putting that data in front of them where they don't have to do the data themselves. Yeah, that's really what successful territory design is to me.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really great way of looking at it. And for those of you, if you're on this call, you're probably the people who are responsible for doing that. I think the more that you can take that load off of the reps, the better. They have an incredibly hard job already, right? It's hard enough to make 100 dials and get told no 99 times, right? Like it's to add this other layer to it is a real challenge. So, that's the why. And I do want to stress, the point of what Jasmine is talking about there is that when you do that successfully, you are helping the reps, be successful, which again is about hitting your revenue target as a company. And so if you're not doing that, if the reps are wasting time trying to figure out which accounts to work, if the reps are spending time, being unsure that the accounts they're actually working are any good, like these are challenges that you're going to have. And if you deploy a bunch of reps against the wrong accounts that aren't a good ICP fit, or accounts that are not the right ones to be working, then you're going to be wasting all of that precious quota capacity. I think it's pretty clear, and we'll return to this theme a lot in 2023 and 2024, you can't waste a drop of quota capacity. So let's talk about kind of the highest level decision that you need to make. What are the flavors? And I think of this as flavors, like what are the flavors of territory? And what does that mean? Because I think most of the time when we talk about territory, I say that word, and most people think, okay, we're talking about zip codes or states or something like that. They think about geography, but I would encourage you all to think about it a little bit more broadly than that. Now, I know Jasmine and I mostly see eye to eye on this. I think she's got a slight different interpretation. I'll go first, and then Jasmine, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But I think that at the highest level, there's really two ways to think about territory. One is the probably the more traditional way, the static way. And what I think about when I think about that is what we think about when we say, hey, we're going to carve up the world in Q4 by zip codes, and we're going to hand those out to a rep and say, hey, rep, you've got Northern Arkansas, and then you got this other rep has Northern California, right? You hand those out and you say, okay, this is your patch, go make it happen, right? It's kind of the classic like rah sales sort of approach that just says, look, if you're a good enough rep, you can spin gold from whatever I give you. Right. And obviously I have a little bit of bias on this, but the point is there are good reasons to have static territory models. If you're selling, a very enterprise sales cycle with very long sales cycles, you do want to build a relationship over a long period of time. If you're faster, more mid-market, more SMB, that's less important. And when I think about the static models, you can carve those in different ways. And I do think of those as kind of a carve, right? It's like a one-time thing. You can carve those by geography, which is what most people think of with territory, but you can also carve them by vertical if you have, and we'll talk about choices that you can make here. If you've got like industry specific sales motions, and then a lot of enterprise businesses do named accounts. Like here's your set of 25 accounts and you're going to spend your year working on that. On the other side, though, I think of dynamic models where it's more about continuously balancing kind of that supply and demand. For a lot of companies, if you're just starting out, many companies that are very heavily inbound oriented are just going to kind of do a round robin approach. That can kind of tend into something I don't list here, which I kind of think of as the Wild West, not to be confused with the terrible Will Smith movie, Wild Wild West. Debatable whether it's terrible, but in a Wild West kind of model, you kind of have a round robin for your inbounds, but then you also allow reps to just sort of prospect into wherever they want, and it can get a little chaotic. And then the other, more controlled version of that model is a version that we care a lot about here at GradientWorks, which is dynamic books, which is really about matching supply and demand on a continuous basis, but doing it in a very capacity aware, very controlled way. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit more, but this is kind of the family tree I see. But Jasmine, I think you have a slightly different take on it.
I do actually. So I really do love this slide because I think it touches on all the different pieces and variables that go into the way that any RevOps person is thinking about territory, but I would format it a little bit differently because when I've done static models in the past, named accounts, vertical, geography, they weren't one or the other. They were kind of a mix of all of them. Right. And then as a successful or what a successful RevOps leader or sales ops leader should be doing is instilling some kind of dynamic model manually with that process. So for example, it might be named accounts, but you might have implemented some kind of account scoring model to identify these are the named accounts that we're going to assign, right? So you're usually applying some kind of ICP. And so then when you're actually going to apply those, you're trying to on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, reevaluate those scores, redistribute accounts. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason that we're all here is because how manual this process is. And going back to that story about how I was radicalized into RevOps and exactly kind of what happened there, this was a story where we were split geography, and it was exactly as you said, Hayes, it was by zip code. And there was one inbound, I was an SDR at the time, and there was one inbound SDR that had Texas and California. I think you can imagine how well he was doing when he was assigned those two territories. And I was assigned New York, which at the time was not a market all for us. But the way we decided on that, and it wasn't that we hadn't done any analysis and we had distributed the geographies randomly, we had done TAM analysis at the time. We were looking about the total addressable market in all these territories and split them up evenly that way. But what we didn't account for was that inbound traffic and brand awareness we already had in those markets. So even though the TAM was equal, him and I were getting completely different inbound leads, where he was getting about 200 inbound leads a month and I was getting like 10. So he was very successful without even trying. And I was putting in 100 calls a day and 500 emails and getting very little credit. That is what radicalized me to try and do this differently.
And I think that's when you talk to reps usually, and you ask, hey, why'd you leave your last job? A lot of times the answer is one of three things. It's my manager, my comp, or my territory. And often 2 and 3 are very closely related. So, and we've got a question here about field reps and what should you pay attention to when you're thinking about territory management there. And I'm hoping, Rod, that this answers a little bit of your question, and we'll kind of answer it throughout. There are plenty of businesses out there where you need field reps. There may be businesses where you're selling to a bunch of rooftops across the country and you really need people, on the street talking to the local coffee shop or whatever, right? There's reason. And then, there are still very much enterprise sales motions where you actually need somebody in market who's going to walk in the door, right? I think what we've seen over the last 3 years of kind of change in sales is that field motions are less the default, right? But they're ultimately still relevant in some industries. And so I think the way I would look at this is you've got this menu of things, and bear in mind that these aren't all mutually exclusive. You can build out models where you have a mix of these. You can build out models where you kind of have a sort of semi-dynamic adjustment. And I think most territory models, even if they're quote unquote static, like to Jasmine's point, they need adjustment. It's not a set it and forget it thing. That's why we call this territory management, not just like territory design or territory planning. It's an ongoing thing. So I'm not going to, read every part of this slide, but I really would encourage you to step back with your sales leadership, or if you are the sales leader, step back with yourself, I guess, and think deeply about what is really necessary for my business. Do I need someone who is in market who can actually step in the door, right? Do I really sell a product that is heavily verticalized or needs to be heavily verticalized? I think this is one of the places where people make a mistake a lot. There's a real sense of like, well, there's a little bit of difference between selling to, this industry versus this industry. So I'm gonna put this rep focused on this industry and this rep focused on this other industry. And what almost always happens when you do that type of verticalization is just naturally one of those industries is one that you're better in, you're more mature in, and they have more opportunity, and then one that you're trying to break into. So you give that one to that rep, and they may struggle. You also put yourself in a single point of failure type mode, where if somebody leaves, suddenly you've lost like any industry expertise in a particular area. So I think verticalization is really only applicable when you are extremely different in your go-to-market for one industry or another, or there is just incredibly deep expertise required. And if that's the case, I would encourage you to think about an overlay or like sales engineer or like a specialist type model that you can bring in a vertical world.
I would even add that verticalization can also be by segment. So I have seen that, between really enterprise accounts or national accounts where we're trying to go after headquarters versus, child accounts. I'm thinking Salesforce terms, right? That maybe introductory or new reps would be assigned to versus a more senior rep who would be able to handle communication at the HQ level. And so if you were going to go to vertical, I think that would be my best recommendation and use case for that, putting senior reps on more enterprise accounts that can have a bigger conversation for bigger deals.
Yeah. And I think that level of, so I think about that as, I tend to use the word segmentation for that. So like, that's how I think about it. I think there often are a very different, there's a different motion. In the end of the day, all of this is about building the right motion that serves your business and serves your customers, right? And I think we lose sight of that sometimes because people just sort of apply their playbook, right? But what I would say here is, like, when you're thinking about the more dynamic models, I would say if you have a very short sales cycle and it's heavily inbound driven, like it sounds a little bit like maybe, Jasmine, what you were describing in your previous role, consider maybe just a round robin, right? Like, there's no reason perhaps to have somebody with Texas and California and then somebody with, other states, like just round robin it so that it's evenly applied. And then dynamic books is really best applied when you have relatively fast sales cycles. And I don't mean super fast. I mean, call it 30 to 90 days, something like that. You have a hybrid between inbound and outbound, and you're dealing with some level of uncertainty about what your headcount's going to be. I think many of us are. It used to be in a good direction, now not so much. And you want to maximize coverage. I think that's one of the most important things is, if your goal is to make sure you're covering the maximum number of accounts that are in your ICP with a particular amount of quota capacity, I think the dynamic books model tends to do a good job of that because it manages capacity on an ongoing basis. So I'm not going to belabor the dynamic books component. Again, this is something we do at Gradient Works. Happy to have a conversation about that, but this isn't about selling Gradient Works. This is about helping you understand territory design. So I'm going to skip that. So I want to go ahead and talk about territory requirements and modeling. So, and in that regard, I think this is what people think of when they think of territory design and territory planning. It's a bunch of spreadsheets and late nights and general misery, along with like horse trading and things like that. And it is to some degree. So let's talk about what the shape of that particular bit of misery. I'm a very visual person, and I like to think of things in terms of kind of like connections and flows and things like that. So to me, this helps. Hopefully this will help some of the rest of you, because I think you get a big spreadsheet and you look at like all these conversion rates and things like that, and that's fine. But I'm not an FP&A person. I can't like see the matrix, in that case. Like, I think it's helpful to kind of think of it in this way. When you're doing your territory planning and modeling, you've got to think about, what am I going to get from marketing? So what kind of, marketing qualified leads, MQLs am I going to get? Who's that going to go to? What's going to be their conversion rates from MQLs to, sales qualified opportunities? And this is assuming you have like a split between a BDR and an AE type role. So if you have a full cycle, you can just skip that and think about what's going to happen with your AEs and their ability to convert. So that's the inbound side, but then you need to think about the outbound side too. I think many of us can't rely on inbounds purely, especially now, right? We've got to think about, how are we actively covering? And so you need to think about your workable accounts, like how many accounts can we actually go after? And we'll talk about that in the next section, about things like your ICP and then a bunch of acronyms, SAM, SOM, TAM, all those fun things. Right? And those are going to go to your SDRs or your full cycle reps, and then they're going to create qualified opportunities. And then ultimately you need to think about, from there, what's your close rate? What's your ACV? What's your sales cycle length? You got to kind of put all those pieces into the model. And when you do this, a lot of times people start from a top-down perspective, which is fine if you start there, but you can't stop there. People start from a top-down perspective and say, well, here's the number we want to hit, right? And so then you work backwards and you figure out a bunch of stuff, thinking about how many reps you need and that sort of thing. And that's the top-down approach. And then there's the bottoms-up approach, where you start from, well, what's the market look like? How many inbounds do we have? How many accounts are in our obtainable market? And then kind of move through applying your existing conversion rates into that. And so I'll pause here for a second, but I will preview one thing, which is just to say, you got to do both, and they have to work together. So if you do a top-down model and you do a bottom-up model and they don't match, and your top-down model says you're going to make, $10 million next year, and your bottoms-up model says you're going to make 5, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to make 10 next year, right? So it's really important that you think about these two things matching. So before I jump over into a little bit more detail on that, Jasmine, what are your thoughts on how to tackle this problem?
Yeah, I love this slide because I actually did this exercise with my last organization. And the first time we did this, our bottom up and our top down did not match. And so we definitely did have to go through this again. But no, I really do like this. I would say that there's a lot missing from this slide, only because the way you could actually slice this and analyze this is honestly endless. And I think this also goes back to, later in the conversation, we're going to talk about getting partnership and buy-in from different leaders, because speaking to that sales manager originally who sliced geographically by TAM, he had spent days on that TAM analysis, right? And he really felt confident in the numbers that he was seeing. And he said, these geographical territories are fair. But he hadn't considered inbound traffic. He hadn't considered brand awareness. He hadn't considered the reps that were previously in that role. He hadn't considered our current reps close ratio, our conversion rates, how long we've been sales reps. You could take all of this quantitative data and analyze this for years before you actually get, yes, these territories are absolutely fair today. And it also depends on what your sales leaders are using for qualitative analysis as well. Who are our good reps? How are they performing? How engaged are they? Oh, I like this rep, or we've seen this rep be successful in this industry and not towards these companies. So honestly, you could do this planning just top down and bottom up. You could also do it through the middle, under the woods, over the river. I mean, like back and forth over and over and over again. But starting here, great idea.
And I think, that speaks to one of the incredibly difficult challenges that we all face when we're doing this. This is an incredibly complicated optimization problem. And I think the important thing that we all come away from here, or an important thing that I hope everybody takes away from this, is there is no right answer. Like, I think, and that's a frustrating reality, I think, for a lot of people to try to take in. It's like, oh, I'm going to do all this work, but there's actually no right answer. And there isn't a right answer there. So it's really important when you do this type of analysis to not get paralyzed, and also to use your knowledge and understanding of the business to try to make strategic decisions and provide strategic input into the decisions that other folks and stakeholders need to make. And so one of the things I would tell you to do is, like, to Jasmine's point, like, be honest and clear with yourself and others about, we didn't consider this, and we think that that's a reasonable trade-off because of X, or, we think that there's these things that we assume are going to be true. So as you're building this, like, be very conscious of the assumptions that you're making. I think the biggest mistake you're going to make is if you just internalize assumptions that you're not being clear about, right? And so if you just assume that your win rate is going to be 25% next year, and it's been 15% this year, right? You've got to ask yourself, like, is that a valid assumption? What are the reasons behind that assumption? And there may be good reasons, right? But you've got to think about those types of things as you put them into this model, and you've got to be clear and communicative about that. So just like Jasmine said, there's a ton of nuance and detail. And I'll say, like, the reason we talk about models is because a model it's a model of the real world. It's not the real world. There's going to be stuff that you just can't get all the way down to that level on. And so, but you got to get as close as you possibly can, and you got to try to get the big things right. And so if you think about a top-down model, the way I think about it is, think about your input as like the idealized revenue plan, right? Like, this is what we as a company want to try to get to, right? And then think about the outputs as like your quota capacity and your quota coverage. When I use that word quota coverage, I think of it as how much market, whether it's inbound or outbound, needs to be available to reps in order to help them hit their number, right? And so thinking about, Jasmine, your point earlier about your previous experience, the person who built up that model, he really considered quota coverage just purely from a potential in the territory standpoint, right? And so your assumptions that are going into this, and again, be very clear with yourself. Do not lie to yourself. Like, every single conversion rate that's in your funnel that matters, you're making an assumption about that. You're boiling something that's pretty complicated down to a point, right? You got to have a sense of the what and the why when you do that. On the flip side, I think it's that bottoms up model, I think, is really, really important. And I like to model this from all the way down to like starting at rep activity, right? What is actually possible for reps to do? Because if your model entails that a rep is going to make 150 dials every single day, all right, that's probably not too attached to reality. And I think you need to think about what is actually possible and practical, because, and we'll touch on this, hopefully we'll have time in the remaining 20 some minutes, but your fundamental limiting factor is time. There are only 24 hours a day for each rep. And if you're thinking that reps are somehow going to be able to magically expand that time and do it in any kind of a quality way, then you're wrong. And so you got to be honest with yourself about what's really possible for reps to do. And so that impacts things like how many accounts can they engage with at any given point in time. I come from a very account-based background, so I do think about it as an account perspective, right? If you can translate that into how many people, if you're more lead-based, but I think it's really important to think through that. And if your top-down model says that somehow your reps are going to have to violate time and space to succeed, then you probably need to rethink things. Jasmine, anything to add there?
Yeah, I do. So I actually don't uniquely think in accounts or contacts. I actually think in the way that sales leaders do, which is meetings, right? Because it doesn't matter if you have an ABM model or you're really more a person-focused model, right? It's all about the meetings that you're trying to get scheduled. How many of those meetings are going to turn into actual sales opportunities in your CRM? And then how many of those are going to go close one, right? And so I think the easiest way to do this when you're doing top down and bottom up is not only making that the revenue numbers match, but also making that the daily behaviors match. Because like you can start with that top revenue number of 10 million and then divide that by your ACV to get the total number of closed won ops, and then go from there with your close ratio to see how many ops need to be in your system. And then from how many ops, how many meetings do we need? And then how many meetings, how many calls does that take, right? And then if you're starting with the actual benchmark you have already for calls and translating all the way back to revenue, that way is another way to get them to match. So it's not even the end resulting number, but to your point, it's daily behaviors, because that's the way it's actually easier to get sales managers on board with this. If you're saying, hey, these are the benchmarks your sellers need to hit every day, and then that's what they can focus on. Yeah. A lot of times sales managers even struggle with, I've got this monthly number. How do I hit this number? How do I calculate how we're going to hit this number? What should my sellers be doing every day to get to that number, right? And then so this planning isn't only what accounts are going to be assigned to them that's available to them, but also how am I going to tell them how to work these accounts so we all hit this number together.
And you and Hayes, you hit on this a little bit with again, 24 hours in a day, right? You can't create more time. I think the only thing I'll add there is, also be honest when it comes to the efficiency of how people can work, right? So obviously 24 hours in a day, right? If you want to assume people will quote unquote work 8 hours a day, but be honest about like how many minutes does it take to perform, like you said, in a touch, right? If you've got to hit 100 a day, what is that? Is that 5 minutes, per touch? Is that 7? Is that 3? And, again, kind of, not to get everyone to like, keep track of every 6-minute increment of their day, like, a lawyer or an accountant would, but be honest with yourself, like even look at, the stuff that came up for you today, right? Did you go on a walk? Did you go grab coffee? Did, kids, take more time to get off to wherever this morning? Do you got to leave early? Like, think about that stuff when you're designing this. So, even if you do the thing of like, okay, sure, 24 hours in a day, I'm going to assume 8 hours of work. Don't assume 8 hours of like production time, right? Because that's going to totally warp any sort of model that you have. Unless you have, you have like, I don't know, the most efficient, effective sales team on the face of the planet. In that case, like,
I wish.
Because I like sign me up. Like, I would love to learn more about that too.
So I will give people a little bit of a benchmark here for what it's worth. So we do a bottoms up analysis a lot with a lot of customers as we think about our, the planning that goes into a dynamic books process. And we think about it again, very account based, but like the reason I focus on accounts so much, Jasmine, is because I think one of the things that I've often been frustrated with is this idea of saying, how many activities does it take to get a meeting? Because those activities have to be directed in the right place. At the end of the day, we don't turn a call into a meeting and turn an account or a person or whatever into a meeting, right? And so we model like rep behavior in a lot of cases, and you can see people doing activities, but those don't necessarily translate, right?
Are they the right activities?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. And so, so what I'll say is like, one of the things we think of is looking at like, what can you legitimately hold reps accountable to, and how many accounts does that usually represent that they can work at any given point in time? So again, a very ABX type approach, but for enterprise reps, that almost always ends up being like 25-ish at most. For mid-market and SMB type reps, and this isn't a transactional close, it's more of like a SaaS approach. It generally is between 75 and at an absolute maximum 150. That number almost always, oddly enough, when we plug in our analysis for most companies, it ends up around 100. I don't have some kind of like fancy Dunbar number type reason for that, but it's a lot of times where it ends up. So just keep that in mind. If you have an SMB mid-market type approach and you are, like saying your reps are going to handle 200 accounts at once, like probably not, right? Which means they're going to not cover some things, which gets into some other things that we need to talk about. But before we go from this section, I will reiterate, do it in both directions. They've got to match. If they don't match, don't pretend like, oh, it's fine, because it's not. You got to go figure out how you're going to make it work. So let's talk about building out territories. And specifically, I want to go back to that thing I kind of hand waved about before, which is like our ICP and our, how many accounts are there, that kind of thing. So I think, the biggest questions you need to ask yourself are, again, very account oriented, but are you engaging the right accounts? Are they good fit? Are they high potential? Have you built out like effective compensation? We're not going to get into compensation. That's a whole other, many other hour conversation here. But, and then I think you need to get into this idea of like, how many accounts are legitimately out there? You can get though too deep into that sometimes when you don't consider time. And we're going to go back to time here right at the end. But time matters a lot because quota capacity is perishable, and I'll explain that in a bit. But I do want to talk about kind of a way that I like to think about this. And when Jasmine, you said it really well very early in the conversation of, how do you prioritize and make sure that everything reps are doing are focused on the right place? Right. And so when I think about this, I think about this quadrant of making sure reps are focused in the right place. On one side, on the y-axis, we've got prospect fit, your ICP. Are they good prospects? And on the other side, on the x-axis, we've got, timing. Are they in market? Are they not in market? In a perfect world, every one of your reps would spend all of their time in the top right, in the good place, right? These are high fit, high timing accounts. This is what every intent provider, by the way, pretends to offer, right? Whether that's the reality or not, it's another question. What you want to avoid, though, is reps that spend a bunch of time in kind of the time wasting areas. And that's really sort of the bottom side of this, which is the bottom part here, which is like, if they're not in market and they're not a good fit, then hopefully nobody's spending any time on them at all, right? The trick, though, the ones that get you are the false hope zone in the bottom right. You've got somebody who raises a hand and says, yeah, I would, I'd love to talk, right? And your rep looks at them and they, your ICP is you need like 50 employees in these particular industries and they have 10 employees. And how many times have we heard a sales rep come and be like, look, they're a little small right now, but they're going to be really good and they're going to grow, right? And this is where I think you spend a lot of time like buying yourself churn in the future and things like that. The top left is still a good place to be. And this is where a lot of outbound prospecting effort goes to, right? It's like building for the future. They can't buy right now for some reason, but we know we can get back to them. We can continue to engage them. And so I would just encourage you, as you're thinking about territory design, to think about both your ICP and anything that you can bring in to the conversation around timing. Jasmine, anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. Sales reps are not data scientists. Right. And I think you made a really good point there. Like, oh, they're small and they'll grow. I don't know how many sales managers and sales teams I've had where these contracts come in and they're littered with concessions and red lines because they're just trying to get the deal closed. They're not thinking about the customer success journey and retention metrics at all. They're thinking about their number. They're thinking about their paycheck and their OTE, which they should be. That's what makes a great seller. If they're people who are competitive, people who are after every deal and going to be cutthroat about getting those deals closed, but we're thinking about longevity of our business. So we want them to be actually going after the right people at the right time. And you mentioned intent, and like that's another thing in RevOps is we're managing all the tools in the tech stack. We know how to go into Zoom Info and get a really great intent report and share it out and make workflows and plug in an account scoring that relies on that intent and do all these fancy signals and 6 Sense or demand base or whatever tool that we have, spend all these times on these reports and dashboards and share it with reps. And then they're just going to go make a list view for every account on their name and just do a call blast or 200 calls in that day, right? They're just going to do what they want to do. So we have to balance that. Yes, go out and do your job in the best way that you know how to do your job, but also please only focus on these accounts that actually mean the most to our business.
And so on that front, like here's some ways that you should be, thinking about, ICP fit and timing. Look, the goal with ICP fit is this is the foundation of the business. And this is why the ICP is often a C-level and founder level thing. It's who are we going to sell to? And more importantly, who are we not going to sell to? Right. And that impacts your marketing resources, it impacts your sales resources, all of those things. And that is a good question, Max. I'm sorry about that. Ideal customer profile, right? So this is your ideal customer. This is the definition of who your ideal customer is. And so, with ICP, this is like the most important piece, because if you don't have that defined, then you can get all the intent signals and hand raisers and all those things in the world that tell you about timing. But if you're going after the wrong kinds of companies and you've got the wrong kinds of companies that are showing up at your doorstep, you either need to reevaluate and say, oh, actually, maybe they're the right kind of companies, or you need to say, okay, we're not doing something right here. And that matters for territory because it can create these kinds of imbalances that we've been talking about. And so for ICP, you're gonna put in firmographic data. You're gonna think about those types of things. You're going to figure out some kind of a way of modeling that. And you're going to figure out a way of ultimately trying to classify those accounts. And so I highly recommend that you develop a way to do this for all the accounts that you have in your CRM at a minimum, and then ideally some way of applying that to any new accounts that you have. And timing is it's just another dimension to think about here to apply to this. Now, when I say it's just another dimension, I actually have a pretty strong opinion here that you should keep your timing dimension and your fit dimension separate. When I mean dimension, I really just mean like a number, right? But the reason I say that is I see a lot of people combine those two things together into a single score. And sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bad thing, because ultimately like I said before in the previous slide, a lot of your outbound is going to be to your best fit accounts. Right. And a lot of your responsive, reactive type work is going to be to maybe people who come inbound, those types of things. Those are gonna be timing signals that you see. Now, ideally, your outbound is also equipped with timing signals, so you're doing it at the right time. But I highly recommend that you keep those two things separate, so you can think about, as you're designing territory, you're not just thinking about the potential, like this is a good ICP fit and has potential of a whole bunch of revenue, right? But you're also thinking about how timing fits into that. So I wanted to, before we move on real quick, in answer to your question, Max, there's one other kind of ICP, which is the insane clown posse. If you're my age, that might make sense. But I did want to say real quick, I do believe ICP is incredibly important. We have something coming soon from GradientWorks. Think of it as AI to help drive your ICP definition. So if you go to that URL right there, gradient.works /RC preview, I'd love for you to sign up for that because it's coming really, really soon. And I think it'll be incredibly helpful for many folks who are trying to kind of sort through this thicket of all of these data and everything that goes into thinking about what your ICP should be. So check that out, coming soon. But let's go ahead and come back to, think about timing signals for a second. I'm not going to read through all of this because I know we're running low on time, but I think of many people think about like their hand raisers as like their inbound leads, right? And then that's kind of it. But I think increasingly you've got to be pretty sophisticated about what are all of the signals that say I should be working on an account. And roughly speaking, and we'll share this afterwards, I think you've got kind of third-party signals that come from like expensive intent providers and things like that. You've got first-party signals, people actually engaging with your stuff. And then as your, PLG, if you have a PLG motion, you're going to have product signals and those types of things, right? So there's lots of things that you can use here that can contribute to how you think about timing. So I want to wrap up with the time we have left talking about time for a second. This sounds like an existential kind of question. What is time, right? Especially what is time with territory? But time, when I think about territory and time, I want to make a really clear statement here. Your quota capacity, and when I say quota capacity, just to make sure everybody knows what I mean by that, that's the number of reps that you have times whatever it is that you're effectively asking them to go do, what their quota is, right? And that's perishable. Like people think about this idea of like, oh, okay, this rep is going to close, their quota is X for the year, right? Well, if you're wasting their time, per what Jasmine's been saying multiple times, if you're wasting their time in, August, right? That time doesn't come back, right? That quota capacity is perishable. So you need to think about quota capacity in the same way you would think about, those bananas on your counter, right? They're gonna turn brown and it's not gonna be good if you're not using them for something, right? And unlike, bananas, you can't make banana bread when they starts to get a little bit brown with quota capacity. So it's a terrible analogy, but I hope you enjoyed it. So I think everybody needs to be thinking about how do you continuously feed your reps to ensure that you're using quota capacity as much as possible all of the time. And to illustrate that, I want to talk about something that we don't talk about that much in territory design, which is shrinkage. And so that's important to think about here because, and we have a calculator that helps you understand this, but if you think about what happens if you allocate X number of accounts to a rep at the beginning of the year. Throughout the course of that year, they're going to work those accounts. They're going to disqualify some of those accounts. Some of those accounts are going to go out of business or they're going to go out of market or whatever the case is going to be. And so the workable accounts, the actual like size of the territory that a rep can make progress with shrinks over time. And so if you're not thinking about how do we replenish that, to Jasmine's point about how do we at least add some level of dynamicness to this, then you're going to be missing an opportunity because basically your reps are going to have less to work as the year goes on. So you've got to take that into account when you're thinking about your territory design. And so, I think there's two aspects to timing. One is this idea of, okay, there's going to be inbounds, there's going to be signals, and some territories are going to have richer timing signals than others, and they're going to have a richer set of accounts that are hand raisers. And so we're going to have inequality that way. But we also have, how territories kind of start to shrink and waste over time. And then how, if you're not making sure that reps have the accounts in their name to be working that are ready to work, you're going to not get that quota capacity back. So those are some factors around timing that I think are really important to consider here. And Jasmine, any final words on the timing aspect here?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple notes. I would challenge you a little bit on account scoring and timing being separate, only in the fact that it may vary by segment. For example, for an enterprise level, it's all about relationship management, as you mentioned. So timing isn't as important. But for a commercial model or SMB, right, like timing is everything, right? If they're not buying now, get them in 3 different months. They could waste all of their time on accounts that aren't ready yet. And we don't really need to focus as much on relationship management because of the really quick buying cycles, right? Timing is important, actually would tie into account score in my opinion. So it definitely depends on the segment you're in as whether to group those or not. And I know some of the people on this call might be thinking, well, yeah, but there's shrinkage, but that buying cycle rotates them, right? Or we've already done the TAM analysis. There's plenty out there. But I think the point of this is like, how much are you teaching your reps to fish versus handing them the fish? And I think it's actually makes a much more efficient business if you're handing them the fish instead of teaching them to fish, because that just means if you're handing that to them, there's no ramp time for those reps, right? They already have a list of the best accounts to work because you did the work for them in assigning them the best accounts to work based on timing and your ICP. If you're spending all of your time teaching them how to fish, I don't know if you're going to see the results you're trying to get.
Yeah, I would, I would completely agree with that. And by the way, I want to say that as far as the account scoring goes, I think both of those factors have to go in, right? I think my actual pushback isn't like, should we be prioritizing one or the other? It's more, we should probably remember, we should think about, are we prioritizing timing over fit potentially, or like prioritizing it a little bit more in certain cases? Are we prioritizing fit over timing? And you've highlighted 2 really good points about when you might do those 2 things, which is why I think it's good to just be conscious, like everything else we've been talking about, like be conscious of the assumptions that you're making. Don't try to just kind of, combine everything and to get together because it's convenient. We should just have a score. Think about it as like, what am I actually trying to do for the business? Do I need to prioritize X because that's what we need to do? And that's going to help our business because our business is shaped like this, or are we prioritizing Y? And I so completely agree on that. With that in mind, the last piece, and I'm going to take just 1 minute here to touch on it because I think it's important. We've talked about this, about rolling out territories. And so there's some resources in here when we share it, but what I can't stress enough is that when you go to roll out territories, make sure that you're communicating transparently those assumptions, those things that are going into this. Make sure that reps understand how you did it. Make sure reps understand the why. Why are we doing this? What's the strategic business reason? We're going with verticals because of this product strategy or whatever the case may be. We're going with named accounts because we believe enterprise is the future, and here's why, right? You want to make sure that you help reps understand what this means for them, right? We're saying that you previously had 200 accounts and now we're saying you have 100 accounts. Well, what does that mean? Well, we expect you to cover 95% of those accounts every single month now, whereas before we didn't have that expectation. So communicate that. And then lastly, I would just say, one of the most important constituencies here are your frontline managers. If you have a team that's large enough where you've got frontline managers who are managing what the reps do, they're the ones who are going to be the first place where a question comes up or something like that. And if they aren't bought in and they don't know how to answer those questions, you're buying yourself a heap of trouble. So,
yeah.
All right. With that in mind, Jasmine, any last words on that? And then I know we're over time, so Matt, we can wrap up. But Jasmine, I'd like you to anything else?
Yeah, sure. The only thing I would add to this is communicating changes to reps is making sure that the sales managers were in the beginning of this when you actually were planning out the territories. Because actually the way I did this in my current organization to get them bought in a new way of doing territory management, actually Grady works. I actually had them do the reassignment of accounts because they were really stuck in this qualitative feeling of how reps are performing and which reps they wanted assigned to which accounts based on their own gut feeling. Takes a lot of guts to be a sales rep and a sales manager, right. But it was all gut feeling for them. So I said, okay, here's a list view. Here's how you inline edit. You go and assign all these accounts. And then they were able to actually own the how and the why because they did it themselves. And it actually got them to also see how maybe the oldest processes and why we needed a change.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring them along for the ride, even if they're painful and bumpy. No, that's great. And yeah, I'm just going to second what you mentioned, that last point, Hayes, on the frontline managers and the importance of them, at least as it relates to sales. I don't know if there's a more impactful like type of role. And so, yeah, on the RevOps side, when it comes to something like this, make sure those people are bought in, aware, educated, because they will be a voice for you when you're not able to be there in the room. So with that, Hayes, Jasmine, thank you for dropping a whole lot of knowledge around territory management, territory design on us today. Really appreciate it. I know that the Gradient Works crew is going to send some follow-ups to everybody after this with a bunch of the resources that we shared and talked about, including the deck. And for everybody who tuned in, thank you for doing that as well. But with that, I will let you all run, and I will see you on the flip side, hopefully at our next digital event. So take care, y'all. We'll see you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, bye now.